Look at our first task, 15.1 for DHCP. We're told on branch 2, router 3, to set up a DHCP pool and to assign IP addresses to all phones in the range of 177.3.11.0/24, however not to allow addresses .1 through 20 to be handed out in that subnet, to ensure the proper default router and TFTP server options are chosen, and we're told that all phones, both Skinny and SIP, will download their files via TFTP from the IP address of the loopback 0 interface. So let's go ahead and bring up our router, and we want to be on router 3. And let's do a show IP interface brief, pipe to exclude unassigned, so we only get interfaces that have IP addresses. Okay, so we see that our fast00.11 and .12, actually let's take a look at our topology. Let me pull that up real briefly. Okay, here's our topology that we're going to be using for this deep dive. So we see that we've got the voice rack diagram, and we're using the classroom version. If you attended one of our live classes, this is the same setup that you'll see for the deep dive. And we have these 3 phones directly attached to the rack. Now, if you're renting rack time, they are physically attached to the rack. If you're in one of our live classes or here in the deep dive, they are actually in front of you, so they're miles away, thousands of miles away possibly from the actual rack. However, they still look through layer 2 tunneling like they are directly attached to the rack, but they are not directly attached. It is actually layer 2 tunneling. Now, the reason I point this out is this is actually the way that you will be tested in the real lab. Even if you're in San Jose and every other site, all of the hardware is in San Jose, but even San Jose has the same setup where all of the phones are not directly physically attached to the rack. They are actually layer 2 tunneled, so they look like, through CDP, they look like they're attached to the, branch 1 switch, the corporate headquarters switch, the main site, or the branch 1 site attached to the Ethernet switch module, or the branch 2 site attached to, in the real lab, probably another Ethernet switch module, but here we have a 3550 switch, which you're not responsible for configuring, but however it is there, it's fully configured for you, and that's where our phones are attached. Okay, so that's how they look like they're attached. Okay, so at our branch 2 site, we have VLAN 11 that's being used for voice and 12 that's used for data. So let's go ahead and minimize that, and VLAN 11 maps to fast00.11. Let's do a show run interface fast00.11, and then also .12. We see that we've got interface.11 actually maps to 802.1Q encapsulation, trunking to VLAN 11, and then it's the voice VLAN, and it's 177.3.11.1/24, just as we were told to set up a DHCP pool for. Our loopback 0, which is going to be used for TFTP, is 177.1.254.3. Okay, so let's go ahead and, per our task, jump into config T. We want to do our IP DHCP excluded address pool before we actually create the pool itself. So 177.3.11.1 is the low address. The high address is 177.3.11.20. And that should do it. Now we'll create an IP DHCP pool, and we'll call it CME phones. We'll say a network address of 177.3.11.0 with a /24. or we could use 255.255.255.0. And we've got option 150 for TFTP. We're going to use IP, and best to just copy and paste. And of course, a default router of 177.3.11.1. And that's really all we should need. So our phones should be able to get DHCP now. I'll go ahead and reset them, although you can't see them just yet. I'll actually go and tell them to **# Tell all three of them to reset. Let's go ahead and actually bring up switch 2 as well, so that we can do a show CDP neighbor and see these three phones attached. Now they all look like they're attached to the same port, and of course they aren't, but again they're mapped, layer 2 tunneled over. Okay, so we should shortly be able to do show IP DHCP bindings. And we see that 2 of them have IP addresses so far. So with DHCP, it adds on a 01 as a client identifier, so that is not part of the MAC address. This is actually the MAC address portion. So Bravo Alpha, Alpha Echo, there's one of the phones. Last 4, Delta 7, Bravo Delta. Here's the other phone, so we're still waiting on 1 Alpha 93. To get an IP address, let me see which one of those that is. And when you know it, it's the cantankerous SIP phone. Okay, we'll check back in a little bit and see if it's got an IP address. We're not going to sit here and wait for it. Just because the SIP phone can be a little cantankerous, well, I'll give it a second here to reboot after I reset it a second time. Show IP DHCP binding. 2 of them have IP addresses. Could do a debug IP DHCP